what really gets you promoted and what makes you successful in your role is to really see the big picture and not just understand what's happening in customer acquisition, but also understand what's happening in product development. Why are the big customers churning? What is wrong with our supply chain? And really just have a pulse for everything that is going on in the business, because then that helps you have just a lot more intelligent conversations. Everywhere you go, there's leaderboards above the entire sales floor, ranking them, and just like, and have like, there's like a gong, people like ring. Every time someone sells, the entire company gets an email. It's like very like intense, sales-driven, performance-driven culture where I could just feel the energy that this is like crazy.
To understand growth marketing, we have to first understand marketing. And to understand marketing, we have to first understand business. Now, at the highest level, businesses do two things. One, they make stuff. And then two, they take that stuff and then sell it for money. In order for businesses to sell their stuff for money, they need people who are willing to buy that stuff. The process of finding and getting people to buy your stuff is called marketing. Marketers use strategies like ads, like social media posts, and like email campaigns to get people interested in buying their stuff. And for most companies, the marketing story ends here. However, some businesses, especially those that have raised hundreds of millions of dollars from investors and venture capitalists, want to grow faster. And they're in a competitive space where the landscape for marketing is changing very quickly. In these environments, traditional marketing techniques are too slow. Therefore, instead of hiring traditional marketers, these companies hire growth marketers. And growth marketing differs from traditional marketing in that growth marketers take an extremely analytical approach to the marketing process. For example, a traditional marketer may design and run a Facebook ad to spread brand awareness, whereas a growth marketer would first systematically analyze the data of all the current and past marketing campaigns, figure out which one has the most opportunity for improvement. For example, let's say an email that's not getting opened that much, then write 5 sample emails, send them out to different people, figure out which one performs the best, and then replace that part of the marketing process with a new email. In effect, growth marketers are taking a very step-by-step, systematic, data-driven approach while running a lot of experiments to figure out what works best and then spending more money on that part of the process. Today's guest, Vijay, worked as a growth marketer and helped scale a B2B SaaS company from only $20 million a year in revenue to over $1 billion a year in revenue in just 5 years. In today's interview, we dive deeper into growth marketing, tactics, and learnings after 5 years of scaling a software company. Please welcome Vijay. Welcome, Vijay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
So I think the first question that I have that I hope other people have too is, what is growth marketing?
Yeah, so good question. I would say every company defines it differently, and it's like absolutely worth ironing out. I would say it's like everything related to customer acquisition. So basically from top of funnel, getting in leads, to ironing out how they convert, to getting upsells and cross sells from existing customers, is basically managing the entire funnel from like new leads to like through customer acquisition through expansion.
Okay, so like let's imagine you're a college student right now.
Yeah.
Right. They probably heard that and they're like, I don't feel like I know growth marketing yet. How would you like explain that to like a 5-year-old in terms of like paint a picture of what it's like? Like, what do you do? What is your day like? Just kind of elaborate a little bit on that.
Yeah. So to maybe like explain it at a little more high level, like every business obviously needs customers. And I think as someone who studied engineering, maybe a preconceived notion I had is that if you build it, they will come. And this is like something that unless you have like worked at a company, you realize that like every business has two things. It's getting something on the shelf and getting it off the shelf. It's like product and distribution. This is very much on the side of distribution. So nothing really to do with the product side of things, of thinking through what customers need or how to build them. But it's like, once we have that, how do we sell it? How do we get customers? And so sometimes it's things like running ads. Sometimes it's things like sending emails. Sometimes it's things like sending direct mail in the mail, like physical mail. But it's basically turning that process, which marketing has traditionally been more of an art, if you like rewind the clock back 10, 15 years ago, into more of a science that you can measure and you can report on. And you can actually like say, if we spend X dollars here, we get Y dollars out. So it's only been around, I would say, in the B2C world. So like the Facebooks, it's only been around for the last like 10 years or so, 10 to 15 years. But then in B2B, like selling to other companies, it's been around for the last like, I would say 6 years or so. So it's a lot more, maybe like 7 or 8. It's a lot more like recent, and it's very interesting. So that's like how I would describe it, if that makes more sense.
Mm-hmm. And how did you get into the space? You had an engineering background and probably had a lot of career options.
Yeah.
What drew you to this area?
Well, surprisingly, so after school, I studied engineering with these guys, and after finishing school, I realized I didn't really want to be an engineer. I'm glad I did it, but I never loved it. And because I never loved it, like I just knew that I couldn't do it long term. And so out of college, what I wanted to do was like be a product manager, because I thought, oh, like sounds cool. You get to have a manager in your title. Seemed like pretty like a sexy job. So I tried to like hustle my way into that, where after I finished school, crazy journey, spent like 3 months and like 300 applications and got rejected from like 299 roughly. And I went through this journey of like cold emailing founders, got responses from like CEO of Airbnb and like early like PayPal mafia type people, just like trying to shoot my shot, and went through this journey of like trying to get like a foothold in like the Bay Area, because all I wanted to do was like work in the Bay Area for a tech company in a product role. Ended up working for Salesforce for a little bit. Still didn't know what growth was, but I was there for a bit, and then later on I found out about Samsara and applied there for a PM role, but they were like, hey, you should check out growth. And I was like, I'll talk to whoever. And then when I met my former manager who ended up hiring me, it seemed like the perfect intersection of like engineering plus design plus like business, like acumen that you need to do well in this role. And so it sounded exciting. I was like, nothing to lose. Like, I'll just go all in and see where it goes. And I just kept pulling on that thread for 6 years now. And I've just gone like deep into it. That's like basically all I've done in my career.
Would you say that you love this, or do you like it?
I really enjoy it. Yeah, I think it's placed to my strengths. I think that's also been a big theme of like, instead of necessarily working on your weaknesses, just like leaning to your strengths and like double down. And it feels like something that I genuinely enjoy. So it doesn't really feel like work. It's just like fun. And it's like, I wouldn't say it's like play, because it's still work, but it's like very interesting to me. Yeah.
So when your manager was first interviewing you, like, what did he see in you? What, like, I guess, personality traits, aspects do you think makes somebody a good fit for this?
Yeah.
Like, can you talk a little bit about the interview? How did you get it? I'm sure a lot of people, since it's pretty new, but it's pretty hot. So I'm wondering, like, what advice also would you give to somebody who's like, I want to get into growth? What kind of person should go?
Absolutely. So I think the type of thing, so I also was like a manager, so I really had to nail down like what profile I would hire for. I think there's a few things I look for. One is like scrappiness. Can someone, like, when they have no idea how to solve a problem, just figure out a way to do it? The second is like technical skills. Like as someone who does growth, like if you're in the marketing marketing world, and if you can code, like it's tremendous, because you can just automate anything you do, right? Python scripts, like scrape websites, do anything like that. So if you're like a half decent engineer, like you are and if you can write SQL, you're already in like the top like quartile. And third is just like, I would say just general like business acumen. And so the interview itself, it's been many years now. So, but what I remember, it was like one like consulting style case interview to see if you could just like deconstruct a ambiguous problem and like come to some sort of answer. The second was like a coding question. The third was like, I think it was like some culture fit, something like that. But I would say the thing that really helps is, I don't know if you've heard of like Ramit Sethi. He has like a briefcase technique, which is basically like, you can find and measure a company's traffic online just by putting it in like a website. And you can basically read about the company And so you can have a good sense for how they go to market if you like do your research. And so coming to the interview prepared with like, this is what y'all could do to, increase customer acquisition by X%. Even if it doesn't make any sense, the fact that you like tried and like put something out there is the thing. So I did that for my interview because I was like hungry 22-year-old. I was like, I gotta like make this work. And I'm sure that helped.
So you showed up and you're like, I know you're interviewing me, but you should do this.
Yeah, basically.
What did you recommend they do?
I genuinely don't remember because it was so many years ago. But I always slotted it in when they're like, do you have any questions for me? And I was like, yeah, I want to know what you think about this. And then I just use that as like my forum to like walk through it. And that helped a lot. I think that is like the number one thing where if you just do it, you're instantly the top like 1% of candidates because nobody does that. Nobody ever takes that initiative.
Yeah.
Do you think this industry has changed a little bit compared to when you first entered it? Because it's really new. You said it's been only a decade since it was first established.
Yeah. I think like Facebook kind of pioneered it. Like I think the early Facebook growth team, like Chamath, I think he was like leading that, or just like that was like when it's in B2C and then B2B for last like 6 years. I think it's definitely changed a lot. The principles are the same. It's all about like measurement, like accelerating, scaling, and like basically doing whatever you can to grow the business. But there's something like there's this like one guy, Andrew Chen. I don't know if you know who he is. He's like this like former growth guy at Uber and like this VC. He writes about something called like the law of shitty click-throughs. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it's basically that every acquisition channel eventually goes to zero. And if you think about like display ads, like whenever you're browsing the internet and you see like ads on the side of like a website, nobody ever clicks on those. But when they first came out, 98% of people who saw them would click on them. But then now it's like very like extremely low. And this just shows that like every acquisition channel, every way to ever acquire customers eventually gets saturated and people don't want to use it anymore. So the takeaway here is that everything changes. You just have to keep being ahead of the curve and experimenting. There isn't really a formula or like a growth hack. I feel like that is very like, a growth hack is not really, I wouldn't say it's like a thing. It's like a short-term, but not like a long-term strategy. Yeah.
So I'm curious about how do you prepare for an interview like this? Because like for software engineering, it's like, okay, do lead code for like 6 months, do a bunch of practice interviews. Like what's the framework that you approach this kind of interview with?
Yeah. So I think the thing I'm glad about after like leaving engineering is that you don't have to grind anymore. Like in an interview, it's like either you figure it out or you don't, but and you can do your best to prepare, but it's not like, when you do a lead code hard problem, you see, you're just like, oh, I'm shit out of luck. I'm going to fail this interview. So it's a lot less stressful, I would say. It's way less stressful than like doing like hard programming interviews. I would say the way I would prepare is to really do your research on the company, understand like how they sell to customers and where they come from. And you can actually do like some LinkedIn sleuthing. If you just like read everybody's LinkedIn bio, they'll tell you what they do at their job. And you get a sense, if you can read job descriptions, you can see like what they're actually looking for. And you could read like, if it's a public company, you can read 10Ks and listen to earning calls and like read the product pages, use Wayback Machine to like actually see how the website has evolved over time. And you can just like paint a picture for like where they were, where they are today, and where they want to go. And then if you orient yourself around that, then you can speak the same language as like the interviewer or like the company when you go in there. And so that is like super important, so that what you're saying is like not out of left field. It just doesn't make any sense, where as a hiring manager, you want to see that someone is like well prepared and that they're speaking like the right language, I would say. Finding a way to highlight like your technical skills is really important. I always look for people who came from like engineering or like technical backgrounds, because odds are like they're going to be a lot like sharper than someone who just kind of stumbled into it from like a marketing degree in college. Nothing against that, but like just, I would say on average, people with technical degrees are usually better fit. I would say those are the big ones. One of the things that I also did was we would give like a homework in the interview process where we would give someone like a raw data set and ask them a bunch of questions about it. Like, who are the biggest customers? How do they, like, what's happening here? And like tell a story of like what's actually happening from this data set. And so that was a good way to screen out candidates as a manager, but also as like a candidate, that would be a huge opportunity to like really show your like crisp like communication skills and the ability to like make sense of all this.
What's the composition of different majors in this industry, and who does the best? Like software engineers or engineers are better. What about others?
Yeah, so we also saw like, I'd say it's hit or miss when you recruit from like McKinsey. Like that was like a common pipeline, is that like we would hire someone who's like ex McKinsey or like some big 3 consulting firm. It can be hit or miss. I think if you, if we look for candidates from that path, because ultimately you want people who are scrappy and good at execution. And sometimes consultants can be very high level, but not have like the actual execution background. But I would say like former like consulting people, engineers, people with like technical degrees. And the number one thing I look for is like first principles. And this was like a core value of like our team and like myself as well. Like it's just been beaten into me where this is what I look for when I like work with people or hire people, is like, can I give them an ambiguous problem and be like, hey, revenue is at this percentage today. Like, how would you increase it to 30% by the end of the year? Something so ambiguous. And can they ask the questions and break it down and give a good answer? Because that is like the thing that we really look for. And so that is usually a big telltale sign of like if someone's a good fit or not.
And what's your process of looking at resumes and determining who to actually offer that interview to?
Yeah, so there's a few like signals that I look for. One, as I mentioned, is like technical degrees, like +1. Another is, have they worked at a company that has done like growth at scale that is really known for it? I think if you're like coming out of college, then it's a bit different. Where at that point, we just look for people who, there's less to go off of, but the things that make someone stand out are like maybe software engineering internships. I would say like data science internships, and maybe like they've started something in the past. Doesn't matter if it's gone well or not, but like having that like initiative is just like usually a signal of like someone being pretty gritty or scrappy. And these are all like core skill sets that we look for. Yeah.
Makes sense. So you show up, the company is making around 10 million a year is what you said.
Yeah.
So what is that like? Maybe your first interaction with the team, your first set of projects, and how do you do?
Yeah. So I'd worked at Salesforce before and I did not like working there at all. It was actually probably the worst professional experience I ever had. And it was just large, bureaucratic. I feel like when I was working there out of college, I wondered like, is this just what work is like? And it was depressing to think about that. And I just thought, this is what I have to like do maybe for life. And I only came across the company because someone I went to high school with, she was like, she's a brilliant engineer. She's working there. And I knew that she was working there, like, it's probably good enough for me. So she referred me. And when I went in for the interview, it was like a completely different energy where like the sales floor was just like buzzing. People were just like on calls, like throwing footballs around, like golfing, like, and there's like people just running around, like just like you could, and there's like everywhere you go, there's leaderboards above the entire sales floor ranking them, and just like, and have like, there's like a gong, people like ring every time someone sells. The entire company gets an email. It's like very like intense sales driven, performance driven culture where I could just feel the energy that this is like crazy. And that was my first like interaction. When I walked in, I was like, I don't even know what's going on here. This looks like a zoo. But it seemed exciting to me. And I actually like was like pretty intimidated by all this. I was like, what is going on? And then, but I ended up getting the offer, which I didn't even, honestly, wasn't even sure I would get. But yeah, it was a pretty like crazy, like initial first reaction.
Okay. So You get the offer,
Yeah.
and then you're like, okay, now I'm going back to this crazy environment.
Yeah.
And what is your first week like? What is the onboarding process like? Are they
Yeah.
just throwing it at you, or are they kind of hand-holding you at the beginning, or what?
Yeah. So not really much of an onboarding process. I would say first day is like, here are like 8 problems to just go dive into. And I started off as a growth engineer. So my job was to build like internal tools, like sales and marketing tools, to help like grow sales. And the way you think about it is that if you can make a salesperson 5% more efficient, that's 5% more revenue for the company. So it's like very ROI positive if you can build something to like make their like the sales process easier.
Can you get into one like project, like one a little bit more specific? Like
Totally.
Like, the impact it had or something like that?
Yeah, I think one of the earlier ones we did was, so if you go on any company's website, there's like forms you could fill out to get in touch with their sales team. And then once you fill these forms out, they go straight to like a salesperson. And the salesperson their job is to just like call it, try to like sell them on something. But one of the things we realized was that if you call a lead that comes in within 2 minutes, it converts at like, I don't remember the number, but it was like 6 or 7 times higher than if you waited after 20 minutes.
It's crazy.
It's insane. And so we saw this observation in the data, and then we built entire workflows so that for the people who are responsible for fielding these inbounds, if they wanted to go out to lunch, if they wanted to go to the bathroom, they had to punch out, and they were not going to get any leads until they came back. And so we built this metric called initial response time that they were all like graded on, and that in their one-on-ones, they would meet with their managers and they would have the score. And it was all just like, you're not getting any leads until if you get away from your desk, but if you are at your desk, you'll get leads. And so really dialing in the fact that they need to call them quickly because there's a clear ROI to be had here. So we built like a whole process, and behind the scenes, there's like, how do you take in a lead? You know, there's a form submission, then, it's like merges with our Salesforce, and there's code in the backend, Salesforce code, and then distributes to the person. So there's like engineering work to be done, and building out that flow, tracking the metric, and then having them like be graded on this and coached on this was like hugely impactful. And so I think to this day, if you go to the website and fill out a form, you'll get a call within like a few minutes because it's so impactful.
How big was the engineering team? Do you work on it by yourself, or do you work with other engineers, or are there also like salespeople chipping in the process?
So I think the company was very different than more consumer companies in that like the whole like sales, marketing, go-to-market side was hardly even interact with the product and engineering team, where the energy is very different. If you go to the engineering floor, it's like extremely quiet. If you go to the sales floor, it's like a lot of just bravado and just like energy. But I was, I think, the first or second like growth engineer at the company, where I was building these tools internally for the sales team. But I think so the product we were selling, it was pretty expensive. So when it came to like implementing it with customers, we also had sales engineers who would help answer technical questions around how it integrate with customers, like software, tools, all that stuff.
I'm curious, like, how do you, like, who had that insight? Was it like some random salesperson, or was it like, okay, Vijay, we want more sales, go and do it.
Yeah.
Like, and you're like, okay, let me look at all the data and find this thing.
Yeah.
Like, maybe in the beginning, we're still in the beginning phase. Maybe you can talk about like preview towards the end. But.
Totally. Yeah. So I think that initial inspiration came from a salesperson, like one of the sales leaders he had observed this at a previous company, but he didn't have the data to back it up. So it was his idea. And then we looked into the data and then saw that there was truth here, and then just implemented it. That's one of the things where in this like career, like salespeople really are like the tip of the spear. They're the ones who are talking to customers every day, and they're often misled by anecdotes, but a lot of their intuition is often right. So if you just hear what they say as like a growth marketer, if you're trying to like make a big dent in your career, is like really understanding what they care about and what are some impactful things, and just like seeing where that goes. I think that's one way to frame it, is that salespeople are my customer, in that like everything I do is to help grow revenue, and salespeople are the one is responsible for growing revenue. So that they're like truly like the customer that we would think about.
That makes sense. So it sounds like you are like the execution arm in this role, where there's some insight somewhere. Maybe it's you, maybe it's sales or somewhere. Like, hey, we think this might help, and you bring that forward. You bring this to life.
I would say actually the other way around. The way I think about it is that like growth is to sales as a product manager is to an engineer, where a product manager sets like the roadmap and figures out like what should be built, and then how we build it is up to the engineer. Where, and similarly for growth, it's like we figure out who we should sell to and how we should sell to them, and the sales people figure out execution and the operationalizing of going about that. So I would say that, you know, maybe it's the other way around is how I might frame it.
That makes sense.
Okay, so you do that project.
Yeah.
I guess one thing that I'm curious about is like that org, let's say growth. Who is like the head person? Is there like a VP of growth?
Yeah.
Because what I'm really curious about, because I can imagine 10 salespeople all saying, I have this idea, I have that idea, I have that idea.
Yeah.
How do you prioritize what to do, and who's the ultimate decision maker? And what are the metrics that y'all's metrics is how efficient am I making them? So who's the boss at the end of the day? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So I think as a growth person, you generally have a lot of ownership and accountability over what you do. So no one knows you're part of the business better than you do, not even your boss, if you're really just like in the weeds. And so the way we structure our team is that high agency, high autonomy, and high accountability. So if like things don't work out, like you're to blame. If things go work well, like you're the one to point to. And one of the things that was always common is that I think the nature maybe, or the typical salesperson is usually very, you know, a lot of former D1 athletes, very competitive, very like, you know, they get excited when a sales close, like it's, you know, they're making commission. And so you hear a lot of anecdotes where people will come to you, and if you gave them a lead, they'll be like, oh, this is amazing, or this sucks. This absolutely sucks. Like, don't send me any of these anymore. And so part of my job was orienting them to like the data and being like, yes, I understand that this is what you're seeing, but this is the broader view of what's actually happening in the business, and really like setting expectations. So there is like a huge like soft skills component of like working with the salesperson and making sure that they feel heard, but also not letting sometimes their short-term perspectives affect like the business, because they are looking at one slice, like 1/100th of the business, and you're looking at the entire data of like the entire company. So that was a lot of my job. And I think it was also around prioritizing. It's like, what do you do? There's 100 things you can try. And so basically we built like a framework of how to prioritize. And that was super important, where at a very high level, we thought about everything we could possibly do. And then we would do some rough math to calculate the expected value of each thing and just go top to bottom. We're not going to do 2 until 1 is done. We're not going to do 3 until 2 is done. And that just kept us very focused and like speaking the same language. And yeah, we have like a head of growth at the company, and then the head of growth reports into the CMO. And so it's like within the marketing org. But in terms of the metric that we are accountable for, there's something called pipeline, where pipeline is what I would call like a potential sale. And so let's just say we need to close 100K in revenue for the business. You might have 500K in pipeline, which is potential deals. So deals in the pipeline where, hey, we're talking to them, we didn't yet close them, but there's promise here. And so as like a marketer, my job is to tee up a salesperson where I give them active deals that they can close, but whether or not they close them is up to them. So that's like what I would be accountable for, is like pipeline, which is a dollar amount. That's something I also liked, is that I can put in your growth role, you can put $1 to the impact you have on the business. It's very measurable. So you can see like where are the problems in the business and how much each team or each person is even contributing. So it's very like black and white, I would say, in that sense.
Do the salespeople's performance also impact how much you make? Like, is it also commission based? How much your performance is evaluated based on their performance?
It's not. Although I think it's an interesting model, not to be commission based off sales, but on pipeline. I think generally my perspective is that in any role, if you can tie like accountability to like performance, huge. But it gets controversial if you start doing that for marketers. But I think it's an experiment that I think is worth testing. But there are more intangibles, I think. With sales, it's like revenue or not. Did you bring it in? Did you bring it not? But in marketing, there's like other factors at play where it can be a bit more fuzzier to see who actually is contributing and who isn't.
So one question that I like to ask is like during that first year, you're kind of getting into it. You're seeing, okay, this is how it works. This person's good, whatever, all that kind of stuff. What is something that maybe you did really well? What is something that maybe you didn't do really well and it took you a little bit longer to understand? Yeah,
I would say the number one thing that I had to work on was, I think, just like dealing with ambiguity and first principles. I didn't really have that skill set before, where if you have like a very ambiguous problem, just figure it out. And it feels like something that is not trainable, but it is like 1000% trainable. If you really just think about deconstructing problems and then working your way up. And so this is something that I struggle with for sure. And I think just working with people who are better than me at it really helped me up level. And a lot of my teammates were brilliant. They're like super sharp. And that really helped me like learn from them and then get better at that. And I would say a thing I was good at, I would say my technical skills. I think just being like former computer engineer, you're instantly in the top like 5% of engineers in marketing. And so that really like helped a lot and just like helped me make impact like very quickly.
One thing I'm curious about is like the difference between marketing and growth marketing. Like if you had a role as a marketer, what would you be doing compared to what you're doing now?
Yeah, so I would say growth marketing is like so maybe I'll take a step back. So growth is, within the sphere of growth, there's many different like sub functions. There's growth engineering, there's growth operations, there's growth marketing, which is just one part of the whole pie. And then there's like growth analytics. So the whole function is like all things customer acquisition. Growth marketing is more what you think of when it's like running ads, measuring the performance of those, managing customer acquisition channels, Google ads, display ads, all that kind of stuff, managing inbound, like SEO, all that stuff. And I would say it falls within marketing. So it is still marketing, but I would say non-growth marketing is more, I'd say things like running events. So events were a big acquisition channel for us. We needed to host events all around the country with potential customers. There's very different personalities who do growth marketing and non-growth marketing within marketing, where a lot of the people who are growth marketers are more technical. The others are maybe a lot more extroverted to run these events. They're really good at managing those, but maybe not as like analytical or left-brained.
Makes sense. And then, okay, so at some point, that's the first year.
Yeah.
At some point, you're learning how to deal with ambiguity a little bit better over time.
Yeah.
What like key highlights do you remember like over the next few years? At some point, you become a manager.
Yeah.
Right? Let's not go there yet, but like in that process up to there, what are some key memories you have?
Yeah. So I had like three jobs or three chapters at the company. The first was like the first year doing growth engineering. Years 2, 3, 4, or 2, 3, and part of 4 were basically running growth for a startup within the company. And so our CEO always wanted to make the company like a multi-product platform. And what he ended up building was like kind of a startup within the startup, where we had our own separate office. We had our own like separate like CEO or like general manager. And we had to really earn funding from the CEO to like launch new products in new markets. And it was a pretty bold bet. And I joined this like new bet within the company. So I left my old team, moved into a new office, just completely different culture and team and everything. And we had a new product that had zero in revenue and had to like figure it out. And so that was where I spent the next like 2.5 years. And we did that for 2 to 3 products. And at times it was very painful because a lot didn't work. At times it was amazing because some stuff did work. But that's where I would say I learned the most about how to go like 0 to 1 and how to like find customers when you have like nothing. And that was like very, very different.
Tell us.
Yeah.
We need that.
Yeah.
A lot of people who probably find that information super valuable.
Yeah. And so I think there were a few things that matter in terms of the principles. The first is like, once you have some product, the thing that matters most is extreme focus. Like, so whoever you're selling to, get really, really narrow. So at the time we were selling it was a technical product. It was like a remote monitoring system. So if you think about like water companies, like cities, public utilities, even oil and gas companies, they have these like water tanks out in the middle of nowhere, and they need to know like what is the pressure, flow, volume of all these things and track these remotely instead of sending a guy out there. So we built this like IoT solution to like track that and let people control it remotely through this like cloud interface. And initially my job was like, okay, find the customers, get money from out of this. And I was like, I don't know what to do. And so ended up, calling and finding leads and feeding these to salespeople and being like, hey, like sell to these companies and we'll see what our conversion rates look like, our deal sizes look like. And we were calling every industry from oil and gas to water to utilities to different industries. And it took a while to realize we should just be doing one thing and doing one thing with incredible focus. And so as soon as we started selling to specific personas, like plant managers or job titles within a certain industry, we started to really hone in on the messaging and the talk track that would really make us be able to like source pipeline and close deals. In these early stage environments, nobody knows what they're doing. And the only way anyone will get anything done is if everybody's on the same page with who we're selling to, what we're saying, how we're positioning it and talking about it, and what we're sending them after the call. And so being like hyper obsessive about that process was like one of the principles of like 3 or 4 that like really made this thing like click.
How did you figure out the persona and how do you get everyone to be on board?
Yeah. So this is where there's like close partnership. So I guess it's early stage. So everybody's in it if it sinks, everybody's in it if it succeeds. So at this point, it's like 3 or 4 salespeople, like a couple engineers, myself, and like a product manager. So small team, and the incentives are all aligned. It's like, let's get this thing going. And the product manager at the time, amazing guy, probably the best early stage product manager I've ever worked. He's like employee number 1 at Samsara, and he's like seen the whole company grow from like 0 to like where it is today. And he had good hypotheses all the time around like who we should be selling to and what they care about. And he's flying to these customer sites and really meeting the people who run these plants and really just understanding how they do business. And so he would have amazing hypotheses around like, hey, I had a great conversation with this guy. Let's try talking to 100 more people who look like him. And then I would try to find 100 more people, find their names or phone numbers, and like feed these to the salespeople.
And how'd you do that?
So this is where you got to get kind of scrappy. So essentially, like a salesperson, when they come into work every day, they need to have a list of people they need to sell to. And part of my job is feeding them that list. And where I would find these are like, sometimes you can find paid databases. So there's companies like ZoomInfo or Apollo.io, where they literally sell databases of like people's names, emails, all that stuff, and you can just purchase them. That's one angle you can take. Another angle, which is actually free, is sift through government databases. And so this is where you got to get a little scrappy, where you got to read about regulation in the space. I ended up going down the EPA and like the rabbit hole of like how water is managed in the US. And turns out there's a publicly available database of every water district in America with phones, emails, a bunch of contact information, and who runs them. And so the data is really dirty, but it's a good starting point where if you're able to like find these databases, then you can like clean them up, put them into the CRM, and then send them to a salesperson. And the third is like, I would say, run ads. And that's another thing you can do. But I would say for a very early stage, it's like, how do you get scrappy with finding these people? And that's where it takes a lot of creativity and just like thinking outside the box, and even some technical skills. Like if you see a directory online, write a Python script to scrape everything, enrich it from some other source, match on IDs, feed into a CRM. So it's like basic scripting like is very helpful if you can do that.
That's insane. I'm imagining like for this particular project, is very lucky that there happens to be a EPA list of all the contacts. But for other projects, there might not be a list. So you have to try different strategies for each project you're on. Yes.
I'd say the more regulated an industry is, the more government resources there are, and the more likely there are to be databases. So in the oil and gas space, I was able to find stuff. But also there's also vendors out there who you can find who like sell these. They do all the work for you. And sometimes it's best to just buy instead of like building. But every industry is different. You never know. There's no playbook. You got to just figure it out on the fly.
When you buy these lists, like how much do those costs? And is that considered significant or not significant?
Yeah. So I would say, I remember back in the day, like buying one contact was like $1. And so if you want to buy 5,000 contacts, it's like $5,000. So definitely not cheap, but totally worth it if you're like venture-backed business who can afford to like spend on that, because that's the only way you're going to experiment. One of the other big costs is like salespeople time. So if they're not efficient, then we're just kind of burning money. And so if we can spend 5-10K to make them more efficient and really run an experiment, absolutely worth it.
So let's say you were given the task of growing this podcast.
Ooh,
how would you approach that?
Yeah.
It's personal now.
Do I get a consulting fee for this? Yeah. So I would think about who's your audience, first of all. Where do they? So some of the principles I look for is, where do your buyers go to make buying decisions, and just meet them there. And it sounds very simple, but it's like, if I'm selling into an industry where people love to go to trade shows, and they go to trade shows and that's where they meet people, then just go to trade shows. If they buy through partners and resellers, just do that. And so literally not trying to change buyer behavior, but just to meet them where they already make decisions. And that makes it a lot easier than trying to like figure something out of the thin air. And so I think about how to grow this podcast. I would observe all the other podcasts or YouTube channels who are in a similar space around like career growth and getting your foot in the door, and reverse engineer how they did it. And you can probably track this if you like read about these channels and see where they get their traffic from and their subscriber growth, and inspect different comments, see where people are coming from. And you can probably get a sense for what they did, what they didn't do, and just try that out. And so I might actually prioritize by saying, maybe people find out about these podcasts through like TikTok Reels or Instagram Reels, or Reddit for CS career questions or something, and then run an experiment where I actually just try to follow that playbook and then just see what happens. At the end of the day, you don't know what's going to happen. Everything's an experiment, and most experiments are going to fail. All you can control is like what you try and some estimation of like expected value, and just go off of that. So that's how I might approach it.
Oh, so something like going to Reddit, finding like a really popular question, and putting a comment in that question with our podcast.
Put a what?
Put a link.
We're putting a comment saying, "Hey, I found this really cool podcast.
Yeah,
it's really helpful for X, Y, Z."
That could work. I feel like Reddit can be the mods are quick to ban for promotion. So if you find a way to subvert that, or make it look non-obvious. But definitely a good strategy to try out.
So let's go back to this time period of 2 to 3 years where you're going to new projects. You're like, how do I find leads? How do I find what we're going to do?
Yeah.
Any other like key stories there? I think like super useful. Like, there's tons of people in the world that are like, how do I market my startup? How do I figure out what to do? And like you're saying, there's no answer. It is scrappy, but I'm interested in any stories of experiences you had and principles that you could extract from there that could help others.
Absolutely. There's a lot of painful lessons that I learned that nowadays I would just never do these things, but at the time I did. Another one is, so if I think about this analogy, there's something called like an outbound lead or an inbound lead. An inbound is someone who comes to you, like they knock on your door. Outbound is where we go to them, like we knock on their door. Whenever I give salespeople leads to call, they're outbound, but if someone comes to us, they're an inbound. And there's an analogy that I really like is that it's like an inbound lead is more like casting a net and you don't know who's going to come in, versus outbound is more like spear fishing, because you know, I want to talk to this person at this company with this job title, with this name. And so you can get a lot more specific around hypotheses you want to test with outbound. Versus with inbound, if you run like some ads, you're going to get a bunch of random stuff that's going to come in that is not going to be really repeatable in the early days. So the number one thing I would say is that don't waste money on ads until you're at like product market fit and you're ready to scale. Don't even do anything inbound related for most businesses. I can't say it as a rule, but a general principle. And really just nail outbound. Find a list of the 5,000 to 10,000 people who really care about your product, and then outreach to them and nail that process. Run an experiment, send some emails, make some calls, and find some repeatability, because that's when you know you can start to layer on stuff like running ads and this and that. But you have to be able to like nail the outbound first before doing anything else.
I think one question that I always run into, right? Let's say I have a list of 200 people that I consider are like of that persona.
Yeah.
What is a response rate of this list that is good?
Totally.
What is bad? And then what's your conversion like pipeline look like?
Yeah. So I would say there's a couple like, you know, thumb in the air, like kind of proxy numbers you want to like anchor on. For totally new product where you're kind of getting started, if you get like a 2 to 3% conversion rate to an opportunity, that's phenomenal. I would say even 1% is solid. For more mature products, getting like an 8 or 9% is really, really good. And so I would say lower your expectations. People assume that, you know, 50% of the people or even 25% of the people should convert to an opportunity, not even a customer, but in reality, it's going to be much lower. And so once you have like a deal and, you know, you're talking to someone, I would only expect like 1 in 4 to actually convert to customer. And so
like 0.25, let's have a list of 100, of 1,000.
Yes, maybe 4. 4 would be good to start with for new products. And so you need
tell me if I'm thinking about this correctly, because how I see it is like I call 1,000 people. Yeah. Of those 1,000, maybe 100 will even consider.
Yes.
Of those 100, maybe 10 will like give me a shot, and I'll get like 1 or 2 sales out of it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's for totally new products, that is like very like reasonable to have like a few percent. And so it's very much a numbers game. And so the way like we built our sales team is that if you're like a new grad salesperson, you got to make 100 dials a day, call 100 people a day. And so they're accountable for that. They're hitting the phones like from the second they get in to the day that the minute they leave. And it is very truly a numbers game. So another thing I would consider is when you're building something, is the market big enough where, you know, you're not going to call through 300 people and just run out of people to call? You want to like go after a market that's pretty big.
What is that number? Like,
yeah. So I think it depends on like, and I'm talking purely B2B here because it's different. B2C is very different. I would say just off the top of my head, at least 10,000 people in your market who like care about what you're doing. If you want to really like go for a home run and start like a venture-backed company, I would say maybe 100,000 people. And so, yeah, you need like a lot to go after. And so, but then again, these numbers are like very early. So it's like if you barely have a product, but then once you start refining your sales process, it's going to go way, way, way up and you'll start converting at a very high rate. But in the early days, it's very, very, very much a numbers game. Like it's all about like the numbers, making sales, making calls, and seeing where that leads.
Yeah, I'm actually surprised that those numbers seem quite low to me, because like if my market's 10,000 people and I have 2-3 sales guys making 100 calls a day, I'm gonna run out of numbers in like a couple weeks.
Yeah. So generally you call, so if I break down the funnel even further, initially when you call someone, like 9 times out of 10, they're not going to pick up. So you want to call the same person like 7 times before you give up. And so yes, that conversion rate is like low, but you want to keep calling them, and that's going to improve it. And so eventually they'll pick up and they'll tell you, hey, I'm not interested, or like, let's talk. And then that's when you decide to engage with them. The other thing is you also want to re-engage contacts after like 3 months. So generally we have like a cool off period where if someone says like, no, don't talk to me, we'll give it like 3 months and then get back to them, check in later. So your like pool, you never really burn it. You like refresh it after some time. But generally like there's one more principle I would say is that there are 3 things you look for product market fit. The first is, can I create pipeline? And pipeline is a measure of the demand in the market. It's like, do people actually want to talk to me? And are they actually interested in potentially buying what I'm selling? The second thing I look for is, can I close this pipeline? Which is a measure of, can we actually fulfill the demand, or can we actually solve their problem with our product? The third thing I look for is, do we have 10,000 more people to go after? And if you check those 3 boxes, you know, as a growth person or just as like a business leader, you can hire a salesperson, give them a book of business or contacts to sell to, and that they can hit their quota. Then you just rinse, repeat, and you just hire an army to go sell into the market. So you want a big market to go after, depending on like the size of the goal you're shooting for.
How frequently do you review the success rate and decide if you're going after the right group of people?
Every day. Yeah. So I have like dashboards that I would make that are just like my homepage, and every call they make, every note they make, it would just show up in the dashboard, and we can track this thing live.
So let's say you had a group of salespeople, you have this like assumption that you're probably going to hit this percentage, and then you do it for one day. It's not meeting that number. Totally. Do you decide to pivot the next day, or how frequently do you change your strategy?
It's a good question, and it's more of an art than a science. I would say for very early stage, it's not just about the numbers, it's about what you hear from the people. So I'm sitting next to the salespeople, I hear all their calls, and I could even listen in. Like I had like using our phone system, I could kind of listen in without anyone even knowing to their calls. And this is a way for me to see, are they messing it up? Is the salesperson even knowing what they're saying? They're also like 22 and just out of college. Maybe they don't know the pitch. Is the customer reciprocating? And like, what's actually going on here? So I'd say data is one component, but in the early stage, you don't have enough data to go after. You have to really just listen and like have your finger on the pulse of the business and really know what's happening. And so talking to salespeople, listening on their calls, reading notes, like understanding every deal that you get into, and then also measuring it gives you the full picture and gives you enough indication of like, should we double down or should we pivot? And so half art, half science, I would say.
On your dashboard, what are the key metrics that you're tracking?
Yeah, so one is conversion rate. So it's like what percentage of companies we try to sell to end up turning into opportunities that we could potentially close. Another one is like pipeline. So every quarter I would have pipeline goals that I'm accountable for. It's like, how much pipeline are we getting into? How many potential deals are we getting into? Another metric that I used was pipeline to spend ratio, which is like for every dollar we spend, how much are we getting out of it? Are we getting $10 a pipeline, $5 a pipeline? And that would help me understand like efficiency. And those are like some of the really big ones that we would track.
Isn't that similar to like cost of acquisition?
Yes, it's all related. Yeah. So CAC was big metric as well. Not really on like a day-to-day basis, but more on like if I zoom out in a quarter, like how much are we spending to acquire a customer? How long does it take to pay them back? Definitely like things that we would measure all the time.
So this is like very high value stuff. And I'm wondering, what resources did you use to actually be like, okay, cost acquisition matters, using a dashboard matters. I have to build pipeline. How am I going to do this? Who are you learning from? Like, how do you stay in top, and who do you learn from? What books did you read?
Yeah. So one of the first books my team read, we read this together, was a book called Traction. And funny enough, now I'm starting a company with a guy's brother who wrote the book. But anyways, the book Traction I really liked. It gives you a very high level overview around how to approach growth, how to prioritize, and how to run experiments, and the principles around that. So that book, I would say, if you're getting into this, definitely read that. There's a new book by Andrew Chen, which I haven't read, but people have recommended, called The Cold Start Problem, where it's like, when you have nothing, how do you get something? Andrew Chen has a good blog. There's this guy, Guillaume Caban, who's like this growth marketing guy he does a lot of talks, and I really like his content because it's very creative and scrappy. Like, he talks about one experiment where he would actually, if you're on the website and they would find out that you're from a high value company using like reverse IP matching, then he would offer them like an Uber Eats delivery to their door to give them a cup of coffee, because that would improve conversion rates. And so there's like crazy stuff you can do and get very creative with. And reading these just helps you think outside of the box of like, okay, what is the craziest thing you could do using like the tools we have today? And so, I think just reaching out to people who have worked at companies that have done really well with their customer acquisition, like Rippling, Samsara, Verkada is another one. Like, these companies have done phenomenally well and they have a playbook. So people are always happy to chat if you just DM them on LinkedIn and just share what you're interested in learning.
I'm interested in your perspective. What advice would you give to like a small business that has like maybe one or two products?
Yeah.
How do they even think about marketing? They don't have a marketing team. They don't have a sales team. They have like one or two people, 5 people max on their team. Yeah.
So I think in early stage, like small business, you are the salesperson, you are the marketer, you're the sales operations person. And so I'd say the same principles apply. But if anything, you can run a tighter feedback loop because you're going to be the one selling and marketing. And so I would say do a lot of outbound. Find everyone and just hit them all up and write personalized emails. Like, for the company I'm starting, like right now, like I'm doing a ton of outbound and it's like working, which is like good signal in the market. But it's the same no matter the size of the business. Is like, how do you just talk to customers, hit them up, and then see what they care about and try to sell them on it. So I would say the same kind of principles.
And I guess one thing that I've also struggled with in the past, right, is when you're doing this outbound, when you're reaching out, you're probably not like, hey, I'm building this product, do you want to buy it, right? You're probably like, how do you warm them up?
Yes.
How do you go through that? What are the principles that you've learned through that?
Yeah. So I never ask for a sale. I always ask for feedback. Like, hey, I'm building this thing. I know, and I buttered them up a little bit. I know you've been like an executive of this company for a while. Would love to hear your thoughts and appreciate your feedback on what we're building. And then once I'm actually on the call for them, if it's an early stage product, I make the offer. I'm like, I will build this for you for free, and really just get their buy-in as a design partner. So they're committed to helping you out and you're building a custom solution for them. And then once you have that happen, like you can draft up a design partnership agreement where it says that, hey, like you don't have to pay for this for 6 months, but after that, we'd like you to be a paid customer. And if you're going to build a custom solution for someone and they're excited about it, and it's going to be 6 months before they even have to pay anything, and you know that they're going to be like solving their problems with this, it makes it an easier yes. And so I lead with feedback, and then I just make it an easy yes. It's like, what would be the carrot that would really get them excited? And part of this is like selling the vision. It's like, I'm going through this right now, early stage startup, is like, how do I get them incredibly excited and like really just bought into what we're doing? And that is just more like, can you just bring it to the call and just get them excited about what you're doing? But I try to basically lower the friction for them to say yes. And that's kind of the approach that I think about.
How do you deal with time, budget, limited labor? If you have, let's say, multiple warm leads that say, okay, you can build this for us for free. How do you prioritize who to build for?
Yeah. So I think off of deal size, whoever's going to pay the most, ultimately we want to spend more time there. But I think in the early stages, like you want to talk to a bunch of different people to figure out what are the common themes that people care about. so that what I end up building is not like a white glove custom solution, but instead is something that everybody can use. And so that's why it really helps to like talk to like 7 or 8 people at the same time and then really just build for them.
So stepping back, that's very interesting, right?
Yeah.
I'm wondering, there's probably a research phase before the product is even like built and is trying to be sold. When you're doing this outbound, are you doing outbound as part of the research phase and then you continue doing it to build that MVP and then you continue building it to scale? Is there 3 different phases, or like what's your idea of the different phases of product?
Of like of growth or like
of the growth role through these different phases?
Yeah. So it's I'd say very early stage, it's like outbound, because you need to figure out what to build and get in front of customers. And that is the only thing that matters. So that is where outbound is king and nothing else really matters. I would say phase 2 is once you have some semblance of product market fit and you're like, oh shit, this is kind of working. Let's really scale this. And that's where you start doing a bunch of other stuff. And if I think about just as how you diversify your portfolio when it comes to investing, outbound is almost like one stock or like one channel. You want to diversify by finding other ways to get in front of customers. And the way you do that is now you start running experiments with like Google ads, Facebook ads, Instagram ads, like SEO. There's like 20 or 30 different acquisition channels, and you start layering them on. And the more you layer them on, the more ways you have to get in front of customers, and then the more your revenue grows. And this is, I would say, like phase 2. And then phase 3 would be like, now you want to start closing massive contracts, like $500K, $1 million contracts. At that point, it's a very different game where running an ad, no one's going to buy, you spend that much to an ad. It's like, how do you really build like a consultative sales process, build custom stuff for specific companies? And there's a term for it called account-based marketing, which I ended up doing for a couple of years. But that's a very different game entirely. So I would say there's 0 to 1, there's a scaling phase, and then there's like mature product. How do you like win big enterprise contracts like phase? And it's interesting. At different phases of my job, I saw like all 3 in like every role, from growth engineering to operations to marketing to the other stuff.
And I'm curious about your opinion on inbound leads.
Yeah.
Obviously, at the beginning, if you don't know what you're building, what your customers want, it doesn't really make sense. If someone just comes in and say, hey, I want you to build something, that's probably not efficient or scalable. But how do you interact with the inbound people? Where do they come in, and where are they valuable?
Yeah. So inbounds, I think, are gold. It's like if someone is coming to you with the problem they want solved, like there's a few things we look for. There's an acronym called BANT, which is budget, authority, need, and timeline. Where if we want to be like, is this a real deal? You want at least 3 out of the 4 like checked off. Do they have the budget for this? Does the person who we're talking to have authority to make a decision? Do they have like a real need? And do they have a short timeline? And so with inbound, a lot of those are checked. It's like if they're filling out forms online, they probably have a lot of those. So generally you want to take advantage of that and really press to like try to sell them on something if they're already in market. But it's also a balancing act in the early stage, because there's a term we would say like science projects. We wouldn't want people who have just random science projects that want like something that is not going to go anywhere. Like there was like a fire department that called us where they wanted to use our remote monitoring system for something that, sure, we could probably do it, but this was not long-term a fit for the business. And there was no repeatability here. So we'd be doing something random and spending time here that would otherwise be like just distraction. So I think it's like a balancing act of understanding, who do you want to sell to? How do you sell to them? And then if they're the right person, just like pressing and like trying to close the inbound.
So like you probably doesn't sound like you have a typical day, but if you could like paint me a picture of like in a week, what are you doing for those 8 hours?
Yeah. So I would say one big component is like listening to sales calls. And so I would spend, 30, 40 minutes a day, maybe an hour a day, like actually listening to sales calls, understanding what is happening. I would spend a good chunk of the day also reading through like regulations, trying to find like lists online and talking to the different vendors to see like where I could get a list of the target companies we care about. I would spend time like looking at the dashboard and like looking at the metrics that we have to see what's working, what isn't. And then I'd spend time actually working with salespeople to being like, hey, these are the insights that I found. This is who we should be selling to, and selling them on selling to these people, because ultimately they're the ones who execute. You have to get them bought in. And so it was, I would say, a combination of all of that. And yeah, that's how I would like kind of summarize like typical day of like a few 3-4 things that I would do.
Do you run analysis on potential new products, or like this fire department is coming to you? They say, "Hey, can you do X?" Who's doing the analysis of whether that works or not?
Could you say more? What do you mean?
Yeah, like you said, that fire department came to you and said, "Hey, could you do this thing for us?" And then someone did the analysis and decided that didn't work. Is that also your job, or is that some other department?
That's more of a product manager who like owns the feature roadmap and knows what we can do and we can't do. So that's something that they would own and look after.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I want to go back again to like this phase that you're at, where you're at a startup within a startup that's trying to go from like a 0 to 1. Right? Yeah. Any more stories in that phase? And before I go to the next question, I'm interested in any other stories in that phase or any lessons you learned?
Yeah. I would say like like the biggest one is to grow sustainably and responsibly. I think we hired too fast. We had to fire a bunch of people, and the growth did not keep up with the pace of the business. Where if I were to go back, I would never scale until I'm like sure, because I think this is pre pandemic and everything, where I feel like funding was everywhere and it's very easy to a lot of companies like hired a lot and eventually had to lay them off. I think they never should have hired a lot of these people in the first place. I think I'm a very big advocate of like responsible growth for a company, and really spending the money as if it's your own. And so that would be like a big takeaway is like, until you're sure, there's things you can look for to really be sure. Like, don't actually invest in hiring and figuring out on the fly.
And I'm also curious, at some point you went from working on 0 to 1 to working on scaling, right? And I don't know if, before we go there though, I don't know if Jorge or Selena has any more questions on like the 0 to 1 phase or anything else you want to add.
I'm good.
Cool. So I guess even before we go there, I think the last question that I'm always curious, I'll ask my employees this when I was working at Smartsheet.
Yeah.
What feedback, like through that 3 or 4 years, did you receive most consistently from your manager? And like, what did you do to kind of like improve that? It's like on a learning perspective.
There's one thing that I struggled with earlier on, which was really being an owner of the business. Where I think the more senior you get, and like ultimately you're accountable not just for your function, but like really leading into ownership of the whole thing. And in an early stage startup, if I'm doing growth for that, at times it was like easy to be like, hey, I've sourced the pipeline and I did my job. Whatever happens from here, like, someone else maybe messed up and I can pat myself on the back. But what really gets you promoted and what makes you successful in your role is to really see the big picture and not just understand what's happening in customer acquisition, but also understand what's happening in product development. Why are the big customers churning? What is wrong with our supply chain? And really just have a pulse for everything that is going on in the business, because then that helps you have just a lot more intelligent conversations. And I think that was something I struggled with for a while, because I was junior at the time and I was trying to figure it out, and then had to really like grow into my role and understand the whole business. And it's a very different mindset shift, because you have to really think of yourself as like an executive or like someone running the business. That took like years to really like lean into and embody. That was like, I remember, consistent point of feedback. That was probably the big one, I would say.
How did you gain that insight?
I think like I think a couple of ways. So one is that people have to let you in the room. Sure, you can have an interest in these things, but you need to be in the room where these decisions are happening. And so I was a part of like the leadership team for this new like venture, this new bet within the company. So I'm like working with our head of product, our CEO is sometimes in the room for a lot of these before he hired a general manager. And I was accountable every Monday to like report on how customer acquisition is going to all these VPs, like CEO sometimes. And so that was terrifying at first, but eventually I just had to like be there and like show up and really understand what's going on and have a perspective and not just like report, but really just have a take on what things should happen and what shouldn't happen. And so I think it takes like you maybe actively showing an interest and like doing that, but you also need someone to like let you in and share that information with you. And so it kind of takes a bit of both.
A question that we typically ask, which might be interesting for you because you're the first person we've interviewed who is at a startup, but we typically ask like, what is the general vibe in the work culture? Like, are people really stressed? Is it kind of chill? Is it kind of crazy? Like,
yeah, I would say like high intensity, like high performance. So it's like if you're a salesperson and if you miss your quota 2 times, you're instant fired. Like at that point, you're a cost to the business. And at the same time, if you're a top performer, you can make like over $1 million a year as a salesperson. And you get like, you just really get treated well, get promoted very quickly. And that's more of the sales culture, but a lot of this bleeds into the rest of the business. It's like very much performance driven. And that matters a lot. At the same time, I think our team culture was like amazing in that like everybody like deeply cared about each other and everybody was very sharp and everybody was great friends. We would all hang out after work. We have a group chat today for the people on my team and we talk like every week, and it's been like 6 years, maybe 6.5 years since we all worked together. And so there's a lot of like, I think really, we kind of all came up together, which kind of keeps us connected. But at the same time, like the performance, the team culture, the company culture in the earlier days was very much performance driven and like outcome driven. And it's like, do whatever it takes to get there. Nowadays, like the company is like a lot bigger. It's not quite the same. The culture is a lot more, I'd say, calmed down, but it was like the earlier days where that really was like a big thing.
And then what year are we right now? So
yeah.
And then what's the transition phase for you?
This was like 2020, pandemic time. And what ended up happening was one of the products ended up working out pretty well. And then rather than keeping it as a standalone startup in the company, the business just merged it all together so that everybody could sell the product instead of just small team. And at that point, I was like, well, my job here is done. What do I do next? And I talked to a bunch of people in the company and ended up finding new like role that I could lean into, which was enterprise growth. And enterprise growth is a fancy way of saying, how do we sell to big companies? And kind of what I was alluding to earlier, like what got you here won't get you there. And the tactics of selling to, Fortune 500 or like a company that could spend $1 million with you is very different. And so my job was to just figure it out and work with enterprise salespeople to really make sure that they're successful. So it was back to like ambiguity as an individual contributor, and which I did for a while, then ended up like building a team for that. And then that was like 2.5 years, maybe 2 years or so of doing that.
It seems like you work with salespeople a lot throughout your work. How do you learn what good is like for sales?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I worked with like hundreds and hundreds of salespeople. Some of them are not good, some of them are phenomenal. And so one of the things I look for in good salespeople, because they ultimately are my customers, and good sales leaders, is that they really see you as a partner and they want to understand the data. A lot of salespeople are not very data driven and they're just trying to make their money and go home. And they're very money motivated because They're commission based. But the best sales leaders they want to understand the data and understand where they should focus their time. That's a key thing that they look for. The other is a lot of the best salespeople they listen a lot and they're very consultative. They really just try to understand customer problems and figure out a way to solve them, versus like the middle of the bell curve, you'll find a lot of like bros who are just trying to sell whatever they have to sell. And so those are a few things I would look for, but I would really just there's 4 or 5 salespeople where I know I could give them anything, the shittiest product, and they would find a way to sell it because they're just so good. There really is like a bell curve distribution for like sales talent and the outcomes you can get to.
And what were some key insights you had from being in the enterprise side versus the small business side?
Yeah, I would say for enterprise, personalization matters like beyond anything else. So when you're selling into a big company, say like a FedEx or something, which is one of the companies we try to sell to, or like a city, a municipality, you want to treat one company as like an entire market and really just map out who are all the people at the company who work there. What does that org chart look like? Who makes decisions? Who influences who? And kind of like those crazy drawings you see of like a detective, like drawing people out on the wall, like really just map that out and have an understanding for that. And then you want to like personalize every part of the outreach. And the beauty is with these big companies, you can really spend a lot on customer acquisition because the upside is so high. So one of the things we would try was like direct mail. And so for really, really big companies, we would ship them like AirPod Pros in the mail, unsolicited, and really nice whiskey or whatever they were into. And what this would do is like, it would get them to take a demo with us. And really leaning into psychology here, there's like in this book, like by Daniel Kahneman, like there's like reciprocity. Like if you do something for someone, they are more likely to like do something for you, which is why like you see at the airport, like Hare Krishnas will hand out flowers or books or whatever, and then they expect you to donate. Like there's like basic things that you can like understand from psychology of like, how do I get more demos and get more meetings in the calendar? And one of them is through direct mail. It's like, how do I give someone something nice? And then maybe they'll hop on a call with me. And so that's like one of like 20 things we would try. And we would actually like package this into a whole program that we could use to like really build relationships with big companies and then ultimately like sell them on like our product long term.
And like, did that work pretty well? So I think personalization is like one of the key things. So like if you do that, you build the relationship, you get the demo.
Yeah. Another one is like prioritization. So if you have like all these accounts to go after, how do you figure out where to prioritize? Like when a salesperson goes to work, where should they spend their time? And if you can allocate their time in the right, most effective way, there's a very big difference in how much money the company will make. And so there's another element of like using data of like scoring accounts and understanding like, okay, which accounts have activity, which accounts have inbounds come in that have had like executive changes, that have had just a bunch of signals. And you aggregate these signals. And we actually had a data science team who built out a propensity to buy score. So you can see like who we should actually talk to at any given point in time. And so that when I come into work, when a salesperson goes into work, they know who they should call to and who they shouldn't. And so there's a whole like data component. There's a whole like prioritization and acquisition channels and psychology that goes into this. But ultimately it's like, how do you make sure that we're talking to the right person at the right time with the right message?
Makes sense.
So since you've listened to so many sales calls, you probably know what good or bad sounds like. Have you ever considered doing sales?
I have not. I think like I don't think I would enjoy being on a commission. To me, that feels like too much pressure to be on like a commission. I think some people enjoy it because you can make a lot of money, but not knowing just like the it doesn't feel like as exciting to me, and it gives me like, it feels like I wouldn't be playing to my strengths. I think I'm decent at sales, but I wouldn't be like a top 10% salesperson. I'd probably be like solid, but not the best. And so I think I'm playing more to my strengths doing like growth versus like a sales role.
There's a lot of data analysis and people that you work with.
Yeah.
So if you were to give advice to someone that's in their first week at work for growth, what's the most important question or questions they should ask themselves? How do they figure everything out and get on the right track?
Yeah. I think the first thing you do is you go on a listening tour. You talk to everyone who in the business who makes decisions, and you understand what are all the things that are going well and what is not working. And because you are new, people will open up. And if you genuinely want to know, like people will really share like what is going on, and people will be very excited to like get your help on this. And so you go on a listening tour and you don't commit to anything. You just capture data and really understand. And I think what I would do is go on this tour, listen, look at the data, and then build like some sort of hypothesis of like the next 3 months, this is what I'm going to focus on, and then stress test that with people. And so I think step one is just like listen and understand, and then before acting, before jumping into anything.
That makes sense. And then how did you get promoted to manager? Or was that like, did you make that decision? Were they like, you have to do this?
Yeah. So I think I kind of carved out the opportunity by being basically the first IC in this new function, individual contributor. So once it started working, it was like natural to like ask for headcount or like build like a function, because it's just too much for one person. And we had the numbers to prove it, because in growth you can actually measure what you do. It's very easy to like ask for budgeting or output if you can actually measure it. And so I think like ended up being able to justify that, and then got promoted, then started like hiring for my team.
So what is your role now as a manager? What do you do?
Yeah, so I quit my job 8-9 months ago. So I no longer work there. How'd
you make that decision?
Yeah, okay, that is a good question. Very juicy topic. So I was at the company for like 5.5 years, like most of my professional 20s. And the company had gone from like, growth stage startup to 2,000 person like public company. And at this point, it was a very different company that I joined. It's like global organization, a lot of process, a lot of rules, a lot of structure, where I no longer enjoyed many aspects of my job. And then my manager left. And so I got a new manager. And a lot of the people who I kind of came up with, they ended up leaving, where it felt like it was a new people, new company. And there were a lot of frustrations with how things were being done and how slow things were getting done. And I saw my career like getting capped at a ceiling, because my boss had left, who's a big advocate for me. And the new person, I don't know if he was as like bought into what I was doing. We didn't have that relationship. And so it felt like a slow, like kind of breakup, where I initially thought about leaving like a year before I actually did. And I kind of like sat with it, and eventually I wasn't as engaged. I didn't enjoy it as much. And eventually just pulled the trigger. I was like, I cannot do this. Like, it's good money. I can keep staying here. The stock has like really just gone through the moon, but I'm just here purely for money, when I really want to be doing something else with my life. And I really want to be like a business owner. I want to do my own thing. And so I pulled the trigger and spent the next like 8-9 months figuring out what to do. And that's been a journey in of itself, for sure.
So the time you quit, you had no idea what you were going to do next.
Yeah, I think I'm a big advocate of taking sabbaticals. And it felt like I ran a marathon for a number of years. And I wanted to take the time and space to really do nothing, so that in the space of doing nothing, I would find out what I actually want to do. But I knew that I did not want to jump into the next thing.
And what is your thought process on narrowing that list down? Like, how are you approaching the what do I want to do with my life problem?
Yeah, it's a deep question. So for me, I did a lot of journaling and like a lot of reading and like talking to friends. Thankfully, like I was with friends. I was in Argentina when I quit, and I was with friends who had also quit their jobs. So it was like good inspiration to see like what that might look like. And I think just having these like close friends around me, we could just like talk through like life and what we want. And like, it really just like having that support system really helped. Because on one hand, like not having a job and like in a cool country, like sounds pretty nice. And it is pretty nice for a few weeks. But after a while, you like start to like seek something to do and some bigger meaning eventually. And that has been just a process of discovery where I saw 3 paths. Like one was join another company and like lead marketing. Another path was start my own business. And then the third path was continue to travel and just really enjoy myself and doing that. I decided I didn't want to go the travel route because I had already been doing it for 2-3 years as a nomad while I was working. I had like many offers to like lead growth and marketing for pretty amazing startups that were doing really well. But I turned them down, which is painful at the time, but now was in hindsight was the right decision. And I just decided I want to do my own thing. And that was very nonlinear. I just tried different ideas, saw like just hypothesized, tested, iterated, tried to build something. And then eventually met my 2 co-founders who I'm now like building this new company with.
And in the new company, are you still taking a growth role? Do you still apply the skills you learned from the previous position?
Yeah, so I guess we're all like co-founders. So it's like you do what needs to get done, whether it's growth or not. But I would say core skill set is always growth and applying all the same principles of 0 to 1, like every single one. And so I'm glad I got to learn about that on someone else's dime and just like try it out on my own now.
One thing that I want to discuss is what people can expect for salary for growth marketing or all aspects of growth. So can you talk a little bit about that? How did that change over the years? How was it structured?
Yeah.
Was it base? Was it bonus? Was it RSUs? How did it go?
Yeah. And so I would say like salary for a new grad is maybe like 130 or something. And so maybe like, at least this is back then, and maybe now it's a little more, but like 115 like cash and 15 in like stock. And so that's like what you maybe start with out of college. And as you progress, it climbs pretty fast. And so you can become like a senior, like, so I joined as a growth engineer. Like a year later, I became like growth manager. So I was managing like this new product stuff. And then at that point, it was maybe like total was like what, like high hundreds. I don't remember exactly what. And then ended up becoming like a senior growth manager. Then it was like low 200s, maybe like, I don't know, 40, 50K in stock and the rest in cash. And then you become a manager. It can be like north of 300. And then after that, it scales up dramatically. Become like, after a manager, you can become like senior manager director. Then it's like $500,000. And then senior director is like close to $1 million. So it scales pretty quickly. I think unlike engineering, where I think engineering, you start high and, you know, it still scales pretty well. But in growth, like if you just get promoted a couple more times, it can scale quite a bit. So you start lower, but I think the ceiling is not easier to get to. It's very challenging, but like it scales like pretty quickly. But I would say this is more so for Samsara, probably paid in like the 95th percentile of like companies. So it's definitely on the higher end for like growth talent. Yeah, was that helpful?
Yeah, for sure.
How much time do people spend in each level?
So I think I joined the company early enough where I got to skip a lot of those timelines where I could just get promoted every year, which is very lucky because I just grew with the company. And people who came before me, like my boss, like he went from like intern to VP in like 4 or 5 years. And so I'm just assuming he made in the millions per year. And he did that in like 5 years. But then nowadays the company is like a lot more like stable where they cap your growth like any big company where you have to spend a minimum number of years in each role. where I would say it's like a couple of years at least at each level. I would say the biggest takeaway is if you're going to join a big company, even if you're really good, you're going to have your growth like artificially limited by like rules of the company. But if you join an earlier stage company, you can grow with the company and just ride that tailwind. And the other takeaway is that since the company did pretty well, like towards the tail end, like most of my compensation was in stock. And so easier said than done, but try to bet on the right horse. And then your cash comp hardly even matters. It's just like all about the upside of the company. And the thing I would say to add on to this is that like, if you're going to join like a startup, don't join unless you have conviction. And if you have conviction, try to get the least amount of cash and the most amount of equity. Because like what is 10 or 20K of cash in a year or equity in a startup that could do really well? And certainly like it's, you know, you want to, I think it's like worth taking a shot. And if you have the ability to choose from where you want to work, really try to bet on the right horse. And there's ways you can like really understand that before you actually sign a job offer.
How do you evaluate startups? How do you decide which one is the right horse to bet on?
Yeah, so this is a really good question. I think by its nature, there's information asymmetry. The company knows everything, investors know everything, and as a job finder, like hunter, you don't know like anything really. And so what I do is whenever I go into talk to any company, I understand like their full like financials. I ask them, what is their revenue, their growth rate, their gross margins, like ACV the last quarter, their churn, like net retention. I like ask them every metric that an investor would ask. And if they don't want to share this, then I'm not going to interview with them. Like it would be ridiculous to ask someone who is going to spend years of their life with working for you if you didn't share that. So like that's like a core value that I have, where if they're not going to share that, then like I'm not going to go there. But then once they share that, that gives you something to play with. And that's one piece of data. The second is you can actually just email VCs and ask them who are the top performing companies in their portfolio. And they're incentivized to share that because they want top talent to go there. And so you can actually just DM people on LinkedIn and ask them that. The third is like all the smartest people you know who are working these companies, get a sense for how the company is doing, just talk to them. And the fourth is actually buy LinkedIn Premium and then look at headcount growth quarter over quarter. You can see this on LinkedIn. And if they're scaling, that's a good sign. And maybe another thing is like go read job descriptions and see if they're like hiring a lot. Are there a lot of jobs open or are there not that many open? If there are not that many open, like they're probably having trouble or they're like in a slower period, but they're hiring a lot. That's a good period. So you kind of have to triangulate. But this is the biggest takeaway that like, I think a lot of maybe software engineers don't necessarily think about is like, it's all about the horse you bet on and not necessarily like how well you do. It's like, you just want to ride the wave. That's the biggest thing is just figuring out the trend and just like riding it.
And you may choose to answer this or not if you like, but I know you're not looking for a job, but if you were looking for a job, what is like the minimum offer that you would even consider?
Yeah, I would say like 500, like all in would be like the bar if I were looking for a job.
Anything that you feel that we missed that like was crucial to like your development over the past 5 years? Or
I think there's one thing that I want to say is that like a lot of it takes someone really like seeing potential in you. I think when I worked at Salesforce, I didn't have a good manager. I didn't have a good team. I lost a lot of self-confidence and I didn't like believe in myself. And when I joined my new company, my boss, he saw potential in me and he gave me whatever I wanted. If I wanted to like have a hard problem, he was like, have whatever impact you want. And he was interruptible. He was always available. I felt like seen, I felt heard, and he was a good friend. And so I think the number one thing to look for is like, can you work for someone who really believes in you and sees something in you? Because when you're like 22, 23, you're fresh out of college, like you want to, like, you need to be like someone to acknowledge that you have like potential in you. And if that's not like cultivated or brought out, it can be like pretty painful. And if it is brought out, like you are just feeling amazing. And so the checklist I would look for is bet on the right horse, work for the right manager, and build the right skills. That's how I would like kind of summarize it. But that's all like stuff that's like pretty important that I would look for.
Cool. Well, thank you, Vijay, for coming.
Yeah, for sure.
That was an amazing interview, and all of us learned so much.
Oh, I'm glad.
So hopefully other people learned a lot too.
That was
good
cool.
job.
We'll invite you back once you're a new business IPOs.
Cool. Yeah,
And
we'll
make your
see.
first
We'll see.
million.
Yeah.
You'll join the entrepreneur route next.
Yeah.